We have opened up a new state data center, sponsored by the legislature, funded by the legislature. The bill was signed by the governor. So there's a pretty significant push to leverage that shared infrastructure across the state. You know, the state previously was in a data center that we had for 30 years. It was full. You know, the physical facility wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't a terribly secure location downtown. So we have been in our new center, and we have really made strides to leverage that shared infrastructure, leverage those shared services across government. First, away from concrete and wires and buildings, it's support. Support from the governor, support from the legislature is vital, because even in state governments that are more classically centralized, we're pretty federated, you're going to need that support because really over the last 15, 18 years, infrastructure has been distributed. So that infrastructure lives in the agencies. So with the advent of cloud, with the advent of really infrastructure being pulled back in, the private sector has really driven that market, but the timing was just perfect to leverage that move. From a technology perspective, you know, what we're continuing to see is infrastructure footprints are shrinking, and the business logic of replicating all those pieces, parts, just don't make any more sense. You know, buying servers and putting them in closets just doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. And government typically lags private sector. But we really feel like the data center coming online is taking advantage of services that are mainstream now. So infrastructure as a service, you know, kind of the cloud terms that have gotten more utilized in this day and age. The two fit very nicely. So some of our bigger wins have been, you know, doubling our virtual server footprint, doubling in a year, and that's going to continue to grow. So, you know, you build a facility, you open it, we work with the legislature after the fact to kind of validate the use of the facility, and you take a very logical approach, which is you don't beat people about the head and shoulders. You make that business case. You know, this is what best practices look like in private sector. This is how private sector is drawing cost out of their business. You know, being in the infrastructure business for every agency of government isn't a good move. So what we try to do is be very business-centric in the way we approach our partner agencies in government. Another thing could be the potential to leverage other cohorts like local government, like the K-12 community, not our traditional entities that we serve, but as you push this stuff to the cloud, as an example, email to the cloud, if you sponsor a solution like that, you may have this group that you've never done business with before that suddenly becomes pretty interested in those things. We focus hard on the value proposition of the facility. You know, we try not to get into the business of what the agencies do, and we want to stay very focused on this is what we can do for you to kind of keep that relationship going. We never want to be seen as, you know, the central IT shop that's going to come in and take away the technology from an agency. There's that belief is pervasive, but that's not what we do. The singular best practice has a lot to do with making apples to apples comparison, is what we say regularly. Very, very challenging to do that. You've got to have those costs teased out. So typically when you start working with an agency, it's a bit of a misnomer that using the state data center is going to save any individual money. We really want that to happen, and we think that it probably will, by way of staff realignment, by way of not having to proliferate infrastructure. But what we find is we're a cost recovery agency. So we don't get an appropriation from the legislature. We build and aggregate technical solutions, and we want the agencies to use those. When agencies come to us, we think what's most fair is to sort of, let's pose that business question. Okay, so you want a virtual server, okay? Our rate is $85 a month. It's a fully loaded rate. That rate contains everything: people, hardware, software, DR, fire suppression, you name it. Well, what we really want in an agency conversation is, what's your fully loaded costs? Let's make that comparison. Very much of a challenge. So I would say that that's definitely something that we are striving as we speak to do, to kind of tease out those costs. We don't want it to be awkward for the agency. We don't want them to feel like we're poking around, but we think that's the most fair way to do it, because in a cost recovery world, we're giving you that number, the number we want to provide the service. So again, it speaks to the point I started with of making that argument with and to the CIO, but with and to the agency head. And it's a business argument. It's not about bits, bytes, wires. It's about the business of government. From a technology perspective, we've had a couple of partnerships in our e-government program. We were having a good bit of difficulty keeping up, with apps for smartphones, apps for tablets. So really not a technology in as much as a business decision to partner with how we delivered mobile apps, to iOS, to Android. And that space, the thing we did differently in that space, and I know there's a separate string on mobility, but that business model, that partnership where we're partnering with a private entity to help us do that, has really pushed the state forward. We are a day or two away from launching our new state portal. We're doing a state portal refresh every year and rolling out more mobile apps than we ever could. So that's been a pretty big game changer in terms of remaining progressive, where I think the state would have struggled greatly to keep up with technology, to recruit and retain folks that have those kinds of skills, very lucrative skills in that market. I think virtualization is certainly one area, standardizing on a platform and then using that platform to build out our open systems, our non-mainframe areas. So the majority of our modernization efforts are moving, of course, away from classic mainframe onto open systems. And I think the virtualization, probably cost per value, I agree. I think it's probably by far the most lucrative thing that we've done, for agencies. And I think that's going to continue to grow by leaps and bounds. We see some other windows opening in, VDI, sort of some desktop solutions. I think most states are probably more in the server area, which is where we're concentrating, and probably will for a while. But I would certainly say that one has been a pretty big bang for the buck for us. We have started our security groups probably 3-4 years old, but really in the last year, with the states that have had breaches, not only when we come to NASCIO do we visit about that a great deal. In fact, there's a panel going on now, I think, about security. But we created a security council that's been pretty effective in bringing the agencies together. One of the larger concerns in the states, in our state, is sort of that, distributed model. The agencies are autonomous. You might have like we do, a consolidated network. So everybody's riding the same network. How do you control that? Where does that authority, responsibility start and end? I think that's going to be a work in progress that we'll continue to talk with the legislature about. And and continue to move forward. But the Security Council meets regularly, and it really starts to create a community. A community of practitioners, a community of folks that probably understand the threats that are out there, how to mitigate those threats, and working back and forth with our group. Our group is still relatively small at our shop, and I only see growth in that area.